Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm going to be taking more of your questions in another segment of Ask Judy. If you're enjoying these segments, please do hit like and subscribe. This is from Grade 1 Teacher. Judy, the question about the change in background music in Season 9 was asked recently on the Waltons forum, and a forum member posted this. There was a musician strike in Hollywood in 1980, and Alexander Courage was part of the guild. Alexander Courage composed all of our music on the Waltons for many seasons. So he couldn't score the shows during the strike, so the Lorimar shows had to use stock music for the first part of the 1980-1981 season. I agree, it's jarring. You'll find the same issue with Knots Landing, Dallas, and Eight Is Enough during that period. Those were also Lorimar shows, and I'm guessing that whoever their composers were, same issue. They were part of the union. Fortunately, the strike was settled and the regular music returns in the second half of Season 9. So thank you very much for whoever posted that information, and happy to be able to share it with all of you. From DJ Doug Forever. One thing I've always wondered is how far or close was Godsey's store and the church supposed to be from the Walton house? Y'all always walked to the store and you'd walk or drive to church. Even Grandma would walk to both sometimes. I've always wondered if the Walton home, Godsey's store, the church, the Dewdrop Inn, and the Baldwin's home were drawn out on a map. What would the map look like? That's a good question. I really have no idea because I know the physical proximity on the studio lot. Godsey's store was like 50 yards from the house on the back lot of the studio, and the church was maybe, then you'd get from the house to Godsey's, the facade of Godsey's store, and then you'd go through the jungle where Drusilla's pond was and stuff, and then when you came out the other side of that would be where the main little version of the church was that we used most of the time. And then just past that was where sort of Rockfish was, and the sheriff's office, and later the telephone office where Aaron worked, and so things like that. So that was all the bus depot right around there. But in terms of how far it was supposed to be, I think we were less than a mile to Godsey's store. I'm thinking, I remember in some episode, Ike gave somebody directions and said, oh, it's about whatever, and I think it was less than a mile up the road to the Walton house. Where the church was supposed to be from there, I don't know that we ever said. You're right that sometimes we drove, sometimes we walked. We always drove into Rockfish. Aaron always got a ride to work at Fanny Tatum's. We pretty much always to Kurt's, Doc Vance's, and then ultimately Kurt's and Mary Ellen's house, we always drove. So those were more in town. John Boy always drove to Boatwright. Now the schoolhouse, because we always walked to school, and yet that was physically on the studio lot further away. That was on Midwest Street, which was further from the back lot. Not terribly, maybe a 5-minute walk, but I think it was supposed to be definitely further than that. So how far we walked to school, and the school sometimes got used as the church in early seasons, when in the Easter story, when Mama had polio and we'd been at church and we came out of church right at the beginning, that was the church, the early church that we used, that also was used as a schoolhouse. So that was a little bit, that got used at sometimes as the church, and other times we used the one in the back lot. So I don't know that there was ever a real sense of what the map looked like. The Baldwins, I think we pretty much always drove to the Baldwins. Somebody might have been able to take the mule and go there, but it would have been, I got the sense it would have been more, pretty hefty walk. Now that exterior set was actually on another studio lot, the Warner Brothers kind of Columbia Ranch, which was a few blocks away from Warner Brothers Studio. So when they went over there, it was a company location moved to the other lot to use their exterior. But yeah, I don't know that there was ever any sense of a real map drawn out. I think there was a relative consistency about which places got walked to and or could be walk or drive, and which places were pretty much a drive. So sorry, I don't have more ability than that to tell you. I think Drusilla's Pond we could walk to. So it was a mixed bag for sure. This is from Kathy P. How did TV shows such as The Waltons or others keep track of the background info of characters so that, for example, a character who's, let's say, had a father who died in a war doesn't suddenly have a holiday dinner with his father? Is it one person's job to check the facts? Wow. I'm not sure how they tried to keep track of that, because obviously there were things that were said or done that didn't make sense. Nothing as egregious as someone who was supposed to be dead and then came back, except for the Kurt situation. But they tried to say, they didn't try to pretend that he never died. They just had the awkward thing of that he hadn't died, but we didn't know about it, and he had amnesia, etc., which clearly, from a lot of the comments I've heard from a lot of you, didn't play any better with you than the idea that he was supposed to be dead and then they pretended he didn't die. It was awkward. It was an awkward situation. So typically there is some sort of what they call a Bible on shows where they will keep track of these things, and they will lay out, say, 5 seasons of a show, the arc of those shows, and not all the specific storylines, but a lot of where the characters are going and what's going to happen. And there might be basic synopsis for shows for the first season, and maybe the overview of what's going to happen in the second season. So for the Waltons, it might have been in, season 1, we established a family and various different things that happen. And then season 2, it might have been, that John Boy's going to graduate from high school by the end of there, and that in season 3 he's going to go to college, and Mary Ellen's going to decide that she wants to be a nurse, and in season 4 this is going to happen. Season 5, Mary Ellen's going to get married, John Boy's going to go to New York. So it might have had all of that as an overview, and so then I would think that they would then keep some sort of those details in there to account for family members and things. But there were missing things, and there were things that contradicted, because I don't know that anybody was really keeping track of it. So I think it was just to the best of people remembering what had happened. And of course, with the series originally, where you had a run, and then you had your first run, and then in the summer you had a rerun, and then you didn't see the episode again. So it really, and nobody could have projected the degree to which we now have access to shows. And they did know that shows got syndicated and that you could see episodes over and over, but I don't think they worried too much about that. Particularly, you hope that a show will go at least 3 seasons, because 3 seasons was the magic number that you could then syndicate. You wouldn't syndicate a series that went 1 season or 2, but if it made it to 3, you would syndicate. So I think shows aimed for that benchmark. And of course, nobody could have predicted that we would have had 9 seasons. So things did get lost along the way. And then, of course, because people can see them over and over, we all catch a lot of those inconsistencies now as we go back, and we can remember, we know what happened in season 1. So now when we're in season 6 and something happens, we go, wait a minute, But I don't think people were as on top of it to remember that, because obviously our team didn't, and yet they had been intimately involved with it. So nowadays, I think they do a better job of tracking with all of that. Thank you for joining me for this segment of Ask Judy. I'll be back with more behind the scenes of the Waltons and more of your questions in Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.